Data from Statistics South Africa shows that annual consumer price inflation increased by 5.1% in September 2017 from 4.8% in August 2017. Analysts say the jump was largely anticipated given the 67 cents increase in the fuel price last month. On a month-on-month basis, inflation increased to 0.5% in September. Petrol jumped by 12.2% year-on-year from 5.7% the previous month. Food and non-alcoholic beverage inflation moderated to 5.4% year-on-year. Bread and cereal prices contracted by 2.8%. Meat prices, which rose 15.6%, continue to climb, and the outbreak of avian flu is expected to push out the peak by a few months. FNB economists say weak economic growth, low consumer and business confidence, and stressed consumers means there's simply not enough demand to spur inflation higher. The bank expects the Reserve Bank to keep rates unchanged at the November Monetary Policy Committee. It says the bank is likely to wait for the midterm budget speech, rating agency assessments, Eskom tariff application and the ANC elective conference to play out before moving rates. Wandile Sihlobo, who's an agricultural economist, joins me live from our Pretoria studio. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Why is it important to watch inflation as an ordinary consumer?
No, I mean, as an ordinary consumer, it basically tells you the rate at which the prices are really increasing. And obviously, in some instances, all the time, actually, it has implications on the interest rates and stuff, as you rightly explained in your introduction. So really, these are numbers telling us on what the prices were looking like in September. And out of this, obviously, we can be able to project on what the coming months will look like. And the implications thereafter on monetary policy gets to be important.
How are incidences like the severe drought in the Western Cape affecting food prices, if at all, and what kind of changes can we expect to see perhaps in citrus or wine?
No, I mean, look, the Western Cape drought comes in at a relatively better time compared to the previous season, in a sense that in the summer grain areas, we received quite a good harvest on the maize, soybeans, and all of those products. And right now, if you look at the commodity prices, at least they're down by more than 30% comparing on a year-on-year basis. So that basically means that the story on an inflation side will remain quite positive, in a sense that food inflation or food prices will remain at a relatively lower level for quite some time. But when you look at the Western Cape story, it won't have a near-term impact on the pricing side. But when you go to next year, that's where you can start to see the implication, particularly on the fruit and vegetables. Yes, the Western Cape is also a good producer of wheat, but South Africa is by any way already a net importer on that. So I don't think that on the pricing side, there's really going to be much of an implication. But it's a good place to monitor as well on the chicken story that's developing on that side and the implications thereafter for the consumer.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up the chicken story. We're seeing cases of avian flu, chickens being culled. Is that going to affect how South Africans eat eggs, how much our eggs cost, and what the supply is?
Yeah, I mean, look, on an inflation side, we're already starting to see that the meat prices is largely sticky at these levels that it is. And one of the implications of that, besides the restocking of the cattle, is also the avian influenza. But when you go now to look at the retail level on the actual prices on what's really happening, you see that egg prices, for example, they're already up by 4% compared to the previous month. And if you were to look July, June, and May numbers, you see that prices were starting to come down at the retail level, and then they only started to go up in the September side. And that really just tells you. And when you look at what the avian influenza has affected, in large part, it's been on the layers relative to the broilers, which means on the meat side. So that basically tells you that on the egg side, you will start to see some serious implication there. But more broadly, I think the point that is important about the Western Cape, also drifting away from the chicken story, is that on the agricultural growth side on the GDP, that province is absolutely important in a sense that about 20% share or so of the agricultural contribution on the GDP side is coming from that province. And the job side also, about 25% of agricultural jobs are in that province. So any developments that are happening there, either it's drought or it's on the avian influenza, it's quite important for the health of the agricultural economy.
I'm glad you brought up GDP because in the first quarter, agriculture and mining were the only sectors that contributed positively to our GDP. And we're obviously battling with record unemployment, high job losses, and a slow-growing economy. So does there need to be more of a focus on the agricultural economy, getting people more involved throughout the supply chain in order to try and boost the rest of the economy and get that moving quicker?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point that we really supposed to be focusing on. And on the NDP, it was nicely tabulated on how we're supposed to do that. Because the agricultural side has the ability on a job space to at least absorb people with relatively lower skills. And I think that the sector can do a bit of a good job in there. And on the policy side, on the NDP, it's also stated on what industries we should be focusing on. Horticultural industries, and looking at the areas that are unplanted. For example, explore the Eastern Cape, explore Natal, and see where can we really expand, and making sure that the agricultural sector does contribute to growth as well as on a job creation side. And I think going forward, that sector will really need some increased focus on making sure that we tap on those potential and we see how we drive growth and the job creation going forward.
Wandile Sihlobo, thanks so much for your time. He's an agricultural economist joining us live there from our Pretoria studio.